Hello and welcome to this C++ tutorial. The tutorial will be made of questions and answers. Why do we need a language to talk to the machine? Because the machine only understands lists of zeros and ones, and we, humans, are not capable of describing instructions with only zeros and ones. So, what we do is we use a high-level language to communicate with the machine. Indeed, if you look at the machine language on the left and look at the C++ programming language on the right, you can tell which one can be mastered and which one cannot. Is there anything that humans need to turn their program into machine language? Yes, humans need compilers or interpreters or assemblers in order to have the C++ code turned into machine language. An IDE would provide this for humans. For example, CodeBlocks is a nice one. But if you are too lazy to download an IDE, platforms like Google CodeJam offer a space to write code and they compile themselves on their own machine. What is a Hello World program? It is a simple program that tends to use every programming tutorial in the world. It consists of printing Hello World to the screen. How do you write a Hello World program in C++? So you can see on the screen. The first line is a command. The second includes a library, where the cout function is. It prints something to the screen. The fourth line is the main function. When you run your program, the machine will start by running the main function. The fifth and seventh line are brackets that you open and then close. The sixth is the call to the function cout with the namespace std. It prints hello world to the screen. Do we need to care about the indentation in C++? Nope, like you can see on the screen. With this language, you can let your creativity shine. Can we make this code lighter? Yes, as we don't need to specify the name of the library before we use the printing to the screen function, that is cout. What we can do is call the std namespace once and for all at the beginning of our programs. Indeed, in order to refer to the elements in the std namespace, a program should either qualify each and every use of elements of the library, as we have done by prefixing cout with std, ... or introduce visibility to its components. The most typical way to introduce visibility of these components is by means of using declarations. So you can see on the left and on the right, the code are equivalent. When you define which namespace you're going to use in the introduction of your program, it then looks lighter. I personally prefer it like that, but it may vary from one person to the other. How can you define a variable? A variable is a portion of memory that stores a value. How can we define a variable for the computer to understand it? Well, you can specify its type, for instance, char for a character or bool for boolean. Indeed, it's not the same to store a simple integer as it is to store a letter or a large floating point number. Even though they are all represented using zeros and ones, they are not interpreted in the same way, and in many cases they don't occupy the same amount of memory. The values of variables are stored somewhere in an unspecified location in the computer memory as zeros and ones. Our program does not need to know the exact location where a variable is stored. it can simply refer to it by its name. What the program needs to be aware of is the kind of data stored in the variable. How can we define fundamental data types? Fundamental data types are basic types implemented directly by the language that represent the basic storage units supported natively by most systems. They can mainly be classified into character type, for instance, A or $, numerical integer types, for instance, 7 or 1024, floating point types, for instance, 3.14 or 0.01, Boolean type, true or false. If the size or precision of the type is not a concern, then char, int, and double are typically selected to represent characters, integers, and floating point values, respectively. The types described above, characters, integers, floating points, and Boolean, are collectively known as arithmetic types. But two additional fundamental types exist: void, which identifies the lack of type, and the type null PTR, which is a special type of pointer. Both types will be discussed further in a coming chapter about pointers. C++ supports a wide variety of types based on the fundamental types discussed above. These other types are known as compound data types and are one of the main strengths of the C++ language. We will also see them in more detail in future chapters. What makes C++ a strongly typed language? C++ is a strongly typed language and requires every variable to be declared with its type before its first use. This informs the compiler the size to reserve in memory for the variable and how to interpret its value. The syntax to declare a new variable in C++ is straightforward. We simply write the type followed by the variable name. For instance, its identifier. For example, int a float my number, like you can see on the screen. These are two valid declarations of variables. The first one declares a variable of type int with the identifier a. The second one declares a variable of type float with the identifier my number. Once declared, the variables a and my number can be used within the rest of the scope in the program. If declaring more than one variable of the same type, they can all be declared in a single statement by separating the identifiers with commas. For example, what you see on the screen, what is on the left is equivalent to what is on the right. How many ways are there to initialize variables in C++? In C++, there are 3 ways to initialize variables. They are all equivalent and are reminiscent of the evolution of the language over the years. The first one, at the left side, known as C-like initialization, because it is inherited from the C language, consists of appending an equal sign followed by the value to which the variable is initialized. A second method, known as constructor initialization, introduced by the C++ language, encloses the initial value between parentheses. And the third method consists of using brackets to initialize a variable. What is a compound type? On one hand, one of the major strengths of the C++ language is its rich set of compound types, of which the fundamental types are mere building blocks. Fundamental types, on the other hand, represent the most basic types handled by the machines where the code may run. Is the string class a fundamental type or a compound type? An example of compound type is the string class. Variables of this type are able to store sequences of characters, such as words or sentences, a very useful feature. A first difference with fundamental data types is that in order to declare and use objects, variables of this type, the program needs to include the header where the type is defined within the standard library, header string. The string class is the compound type. As you can see in the example above, compound types are used in the same way as fundamental types. The same syntax is used to declare variables and to initialize them. Thanks for paying attention to this tutorial. Bye!